Hi everyone, it's patch day. So I went in and tried everything out. It's version 2.4.1, the 2-week patch of season 10 so far. And we have the Gift of the Tree event, the Hordes changes, and the Beast Corner changes mostly that I will be talking about because that will actually affect various builds, including some that you might be playing. So let's start with the Gift of the Tree event. So this was announced a few days ago. We have 1 week of doubled Whisper caches, which is actually pretty good. So I just went in to see. First of all, it turned out that pre-found caches actually gave you the gift, which is kind of funny. So some people told me that this actually happened last time already. And too bad I didn't save more, I guess. But on the other hand, I also don't really need more. But some people that did do that, they were actually profiting from this. So I heard from someone who found 140 caches, kind of wild, and they are making bank now, I guess. But they are just kind of normal Whisper caches, so you see me here opening some of them. I wanted to see especially if there's chaos items in there. I figured there's a pretty good chance that it probably pops some of those into those extra gift stashes, but it turns out no. So you don't get chaos items from Whispers besides the chaos cache that you can select. But the Gift of the Tree is always like a very mundane, like standard copy of Whisper Cache. Effectively, it has a bunch of mods, some runes, maybe an Ascendance tribute if you get lucky, a bunch of legendaries and stuff. So it's just like a very typical thing, which means it's actually pretty good. So the Whisper farming is something I have been doing a lot this season. I think it's very nice to just kind of like go for the big stuff, like, a dungeon or like a boss, maybe the PvP Whisper, and like all these like 5 Whisper things, the Hell Tides as well here and there. And they are actually pretty rewarding. So for 1 week, you're gonna get more juice, but not more chaos items, unfortunately. Now let's talk about the Hordes changes. So this is a bit more interesting, I guess. You have the Soul Spire and you have the Hellborns. So they were just kind of bad before, especially the Hellborns were just absolutely terrible. And I actually made a video about this lately about, with my like kind of tier list of boons. So this is what it's looked like. I did not change this yet, and I will talk about it in a second. So the TLDR is Soul Spires actually were pretty good. In fact, my highest run ever so far without goblins, like on the Chaos Wave, was actually with a Spire Strut so far. It was mostly that they're just very inconvenient, but now they're much better. So you can see this in action here right now. I just went in with my Druid and I tried out a few runs to see like how this will do, and also try to pick like a Soul Spire boons and the Hellborn boons. But you see the Soul Spires are now much larger. I think the radius has increased by, I don't know, 20 to 40% or something like that. Definitely covering a lot more area. But also when you walk into the Soul Spire, immediately some monsters will spawn. And those monsters that spawn from it are almost enough to just finish the Soul Spire. And then after a few seconds, there's a second wave of Soul Spires coming. Or like the monsters from the Soul Spire. And then you will basically complete it no matter what. Even if there's no monsters from outside walking into it or spawning in it. So these are exclusively the monsters that just kind of appear as you step in. So you can see this whenever I step over the line into a Soul Spire, it will immediately spawn some monsters. So I want to say Soul Spires at the very least don't feel terrible anymore. So if you have a build that is, just kind of like insta-killing everything or whatever, and you actually couldn't lure any monsters inside, that is now not a problem anymore because the Soul Spire itself has its own spawns. And not just that, but it also seems that the extra monsters from the Spires also progress the bar towards the next event. So basically, as you finish the Spires, you get a bunch of progression, and then you get some extra monsters to give you more progression. So I think that this is generally a buff to basically anything in Hordes. So you just get more events, you cycle through them faster, and you will reliably complete the Soul Spires, where maybe sometimes you had a few leftovers in all the corners of the map. And every time you don't complete one of those, you don't spawn the next thing. So you might lose out on the stuff that you actually care about, like the Elder Fiends and the Elder Lords, for example. So overall, it just seems much more convenient. And yeah, you still have to run around and do the Soul Spires, but it works. And when it comes to like choosing the boons, I would say the ranking has not really changed very much, to be honest. So I would still mostly avoid Hellborn stuff. You can now get pretty decent runs. So I've tried like 5 runs of doing 10 waves, and they were all like, I think like 1.1 to 1.4k or so, and it was mostly targeting Hellborn and Spires, but this was also on a Raven's Druid, which is pretty OP, and I was just kind of like insta-killing the entire map all the time almost. So it was not really impressive. If I had gone like all in on like Adder Lords, Adder Fiends with some of the options I did have that I did not pick, like here, for example, I chose not to go for the Colossal Fiends, but I went for the Hellborn just to try it out, basically. I would have been better off choosing the good stuff, effectively. But it turns out you can definitely get some decent Hellborn synergies. You can do successful runs of that, kill Bartuk, even open the chest afterwards. If you go full Hellborn, it works. And it's now not just a dead choice anymore, at the very least. So it comes down to kind of like trying to make a good combo. So the best is still the Adder Lords, like Adder Fiends transform into Adder Lords, and then you can juice them up with like the extra like plus Adder Fiend spawns. For example, Elites spawn as Adder Fiends, Masters spawn Adder Fiends. There's like the +2 Adder per Adder Fiend that also transfers over to the Lords. So this is still like the craziest stuff you can get. And then you have stuff like the events spawn faster, the random goblin can appear, it's pretty nice, and so on. So this is still like the overall best winning strategy, and it doesn't need many components, which is very important. Like if you get the Colossal Fiends, which transforms them into Adder Lords, then you pick that, and well, effectively you win just because it does already. And for some of the other stuff, it kind of depends on like how many synergies you get. Like Spires, as I mentioned earlier, can be insane, but only if you get like 7 perfectly fitting synergies. So you want like the +3 flat for the Spire, and then you want the less often and doubled and 3 times, and then you want Master spawn Spires, and then you want maybe event spawn faster. And then you kind of get to the point where you get a lot of Spires, and each of them gives you like 70 Adder, and it's insane. But yeah, this is kind of something exclusively for 10 wave runs, I would say. In the less wave runs, I would not really try to giga invest into Spires, but it doesn't hurt to just kind of pick up one of those boons where they spawn less often, but give you more. It can still be decent, and even like some half working combo actually turned out to be a relatively solid result for me, with like Spires plus Masters or Spires plus Adder Fiends or something like that. Yeah, and the rest is also like relatively unchanged. Chaos Wave I would still mostly recommend for the shorter Infernal Horde. So if you do 6 waves, for example, you see a Chaos Wave, you generally go in, I would say. But on 10 waves, especially if it spawns very early in the run, I would not necessarily go into the Chaos Wave. I would rather do it like later in the run to try to save it. If it's like a kind of a bad outcome and it's like wave 8 and nothing is really working out, then you just do the Chaos Wave. But very early on, I would generally not go in. If you already have good synergies or something good to pick, like the Colossal Fiends, for example, like this thing here. If you get that, I would definitely take this over a Chaos Wave almost every time, for example. So it kind of depends a little bit. And same with stuff like Butcher and Hellfire. These are just kind of like flat, like added Adder, like one-time payout effectively, or like, yeah, like over multiple waves here, but it's the same thing. So they're not really too helpful, but if it's kind of like late in the run and you don't have much else to pick, or you don't really expect that you're gonna get the same payout from whatever else you're picking, then you can also take a Butcher, for example. But like if it's like wave 1 and there's a Butcher, I would probably not take it. But overall, I do have to say it does seem like Horde did get an upgrade. It seems a little bit better across the board, thanks to the like Spire monsters that I mentioned. And it's just like you finishing the Spires in the first place. Plus the boons are a little bit better balanced. But the overall ranking just remains the same, I gotta say. So this is kind of like where we are. And I guess this is what Infernal Hordes is for now. Now, lastly, let's talk about the Beast Corner changes here. So we have this here, which is TLDR. You now have 33% less life drain, and you get 33% extra resource back. And the resource recovery now also works when you just spend a tiny amount of life. So previously it was tied to how much life it drains from you, but now any like 1 life that you spend will give you the full resource refund, although the 40% of the resources that you have spent. And this can then be multiplied with resource generation, for example. So for stuff like Hippodeke, Spiritborn or so, this might be pretty important. I have not yet logged on the Spiritborn to try it out. I've been on the Barb earlier because I was playing a Beast Corner build there with Hoda. And that was kind of funny. But it turns out this is definitely quite an upgrade for some builds. I don't think that a lot of builds will suddenly start using Beast Corner when they didn't before, but it does making the sustain a lot easier in some cases. And some builds might really profit from this resource recovery, even with very little life drain. So if you just permanently stay at 10% health, for example, from this effect, and you just heal a tiny bit, for example, from 1 life regen roll somewhere on your gear, then you can get a lot of resources back. So I think this is the biggest effect that we'll see from this. So a few builds will shift up a little bit, maybe with Spiritborns, especially with Capeleka builds, there's a bit of potential. Then we have a bunch of bar builds that run this and a few other builds like sprinkled in here across the classes, but not all of them are really like benefiting from this, and I don't see really a major tier list shift happening or something like that. But what did shift up actually are the rogues. So we have already seen this, and people were immediately going in and pushing with rogues, and they are now in like a S tier push territory, catching up to the other classes. And I think they've overtaken a Barb now, for example. Not Spiritborn level or so, but pretty good. And the Orphan Maker buffs, for example, are pretty important here, and some of the other buffs. So it seems like the rogues have gotten some pretty nice upgrade here on the top end at least. I don't think this is really gonna like, you know, suddenly create new builds or something like that. It's mostly some tweaking, and especially these kind of like slower paced Orphan Maker builds with the crossbow and the reload mechanic, and maybe combo point builds will benefit from this a little bit. But these are all kind of like the highest end pit pushing builds, and not really like the typical like flurry speed farm or Denso Knife speed farm or something like that really benefit here. There's one build, I guess, which is worth mentioning, which is Death Trap, which actually runs hit and run and gets many stacks of it because it goes really fast. So that went up a little bit. And the Beast Corner changes also allow it to potentially have a bit of like a lower end feasible setup that doesn't require like the Exodia of 5 perfect Chaos Armors and like all the crazy rolls on every single slot with the perfect masterwork, which was kind of a problem of Death Trap. So you might want to check out the updated Maxwell guide for that. And that's pretty much it for the patch notes summary. Everything else, I gotta say, is not really too impressive. Like the single-minded Fury change is kind of whatever. And like the Sorgs, okay, I heard that some builds definitely have a bit of trouble with this, with the Crackle energy not getting picked up. For example, Lightning Spear really wanted to pick up all the Crackles, so it spawns more Lightning Spears from the Lightning Spear enchantment, for example. So this now doesn't happen anymore, and actually is kind of like, oof. So there might actually be some builds that are negatively affected by this, and who knows, maybe we're gonna see another change to this, or even like this reverted at some point, because it does seem to have some collateral damage. But yeah, other than that, a bunch of bug fixes. Wild Rage Aspect was disabled for a few more hours than it needed to, but apparently it's back now. And also a lot of the Chaos Armors that previously did not work apparently are still not working. So yeah, this is basically it. So some, for example, like Dormant Stone is not working, and yeah, there were a few others that just don't have Chaos versions that are functional effectively. So keep that in mind. It seems like those were not fixed. In any case, I'm going to keep you guys updated if anything else comes up. I'm working on Spiritborn stuff for the next few days. I have a bunch more build guides coming out from stuff that I played in the last week or so stay tuned for that. And of course, we have the Hardcore SF event coming up this Friday. That's going to be pretty fun. So I'm probably also going to be like blasting, streaming, and maybe making a video about that when the time comes. So hope you enjoyed this for now. Good luck in Season 10, and see you guys next time.